let's take this caller. Caller, welcome to the show. Please tell me your name and where you're calling from.
Is that me?
That is you. You are live on the air.
Oh, okay, good. I've just come out of Christianity just in the last few months after listening to y'all's show and stuff. And by the way, I am from Texas.
Oh, welcome. Nice. We'll meet someday, hopefully.
And so my question is, before I got out of Christianity, my pastor did this 3-part series on how the Jews were looking for these messianic prophecies to be fulfilled, and they were watching Jesus very carefully. And if he fulfilled these 3 or maybe 4 miracles, then that told them that he was truly the Messiah. And one of them was to cast out a mute spirit, to open blind eyes, and to heal leprosy. And I was curious on Rabbi's thoughts on those.
As it turns out, this is not correct. If you look at the Jewish scriptures, you will not find a prophecy like this, that the Messiah is supposed to heal the blind or do miracles. It doesn't mean that the Messiah, who will be an heir to the Davidic throne, will not be able to perform miracles. It's quite possible that he will. But this is not expressed in the Jewish scriptures. We have descriptions of things in our Hebrew Bible that describe what the Messiah will do. He will speak peace to the nations. See Zechariah chapter 9, verse 10. His reign will be from river to the ends of the earth, from one end of the world to the other, meaning that in the Messianic age, all the nations will recognize that he is the Davidic king, and there won't be any United Nations condemnation of the Mashiach. That's not going to happen. All the nations are going to willingly accept him as the leader, as a physical and a spiritual leader. This we do find. He's going to rebuke nations and tell them to behave and that to follow Hashem, and they're going to listen to him. There's no description there of the Messiah performing miracles. Again, it doesn't mean he won't, but Tanakh is completely not interested in this if he will. And as it turns out, the Mashiach is called David in Tanakh many times, famously in Ezekiel 37, for example, verse 24 and 25. It doesn't mean the Messiah is David, but it means that the Mashiach is, number one, the fulfillment of the promises made to King David. But number 2 is that Tanakh is conveying that if you want to get some sense what Mashiach is like, look at King David. Look at David. That's the kind of personality you'll have. Well, as it turns out, if you look at King David's life, it would be hard to come up with miracles that King David performed. I mean, if you look throughout the Jewish scriptures, you could see that God was working through him repeatedly. And certainly one could say that, for example, in 1 Samuel chapter 17, when King David killed Goliath, that was miraculous, but technically King David didn't just say die and Goliath dropped dead. King David did take stones with him, and he used a slingshot, and it hit Goliath in the head, and Goliath fell over, and King David killed him using Goliath's own sword. That could happen. But as it turns out, one could say maybe King David got very lucky. He wasn't the king at the time. But maybe he got very, very lucky. He just took a shot. As it turned out, you could have a big, giant guy, but if you hit him in the head with a stone at the right velocity, it would knock him out. It would get stuck in his head. It can kill somebody. So why didn't David do something that was more? Because David was not a miracle man. It would be very hard to come up with in the plain text of Tanakh that King David is doing things that literally nature is altered. As we do find, for example, with Elisha with Elijah. We do find it with these prophets as an example. Certainly with Moses. But you don't really see. It's hard. That gives us a sense of what kind of person Mashiach will be. The Mashiach will be someone who is going to guide people through his tongue, through the spirit that Hashem puts upon him. He will guide people to turn back to Hashem. But the notion that he's going to run around healing blind people, making blind people see, is not correct at all. Although we find that in the book of Luke, in Luke chapter 4, verse 18 and 19, we have Jesus saying, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he's anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the broken heart, to proclaim liberty to the captives." Now this is actually a quote from Isaiah chapter 61. But then it goes, "and recovery of sight to the blind, to set liberty for those who are oppressed." Well, as it turns out, this text, as I said, comes from the first two passages of Isaiah chapter 61, verse 1 and 2. But Luke does something, and that is the author of the book of Luke. We don't know who wrote Luke, but whoever wrote Luke stuck in those words, "and recovery of sight to the blind." You won't find that in Isaiah chapter 61, verse 1 and 2. It means the author of Luke interpolated the recovery of sight to the blind. It means making blind people see. It's not in the text. All you have to do, it makes no difference in the world which Bible you use. But it better be a Christian Bible. If it's not, you're going to have trouble with it. But if you open up Isaiah 61, 1 and 2, okay? If you have two Bibles side by side, it'd be great. If you do this online, fantastic. You just create two windows, and you look side by side, and you see that Luke is clearly having Jesus quote from the book of Isaiah. Now, Isaiah is not talking about the Messiah here. Isaiah is speaking in the first person about himself. Because Yeshaya, his name is, which literally means the salvation of God, because Yeshaya is proclaiming all these things, and he's speaking of what he is doing, and that is proclaiming these things to the world. And of course, he is prophesying about the Messianic age. But he's speaking in the first person. Doesn't say, in the future, this will happen and the Messiah will do this. And when we find Messianic prophecies about Mashiach, for example, Isaiah chapter 11, you'll see how Mashiach is spoken of. He's not spoken about in the first person, he's spoken about in the third person. So, as it turns out, your pastor is getting this from a corruption of Isaiah, which is not found in Isaiah, it's found in Luke. As it turns out, I think that every thinking person, every sober mind has to ask the question, how did Luke interpolate the recovery of sight to the blind? As it turns out, this was also a common miracle that the gods, in particular the emperors of Rome, were said to have done. For example, we're told in Josephus that Vespasian, Yimach Shemai V'Zichrei, he would be able to touch someone's eyes and they would be able to see. He would be able to stretch out his foot and touch a crippled person, and that person would be able to walk. This was common. This is common in the Greco-Roman world, said about the gods. It wasn't said about Zeus or Jupiter in Rome, not about the big high gods. They were too busy. Zeus was way too busy running the planets and getting ladies pregnant. I'm not talking about, they had no time for this kind of stuff. But the lower tiered gods, the sort of god-men or son of gods, they were all able to do. And this was the typical miracle that the sons of God in the Greco-Roman world were able to do. And there's little doubt that these miracles that the sons of God did in the Greek world were then adopted to Jesus. But the point is, here's the question that every Christian should ask their pastor. If Luke 4, verse 18 and 19 is a quote of Isaiah 61, and it is, and it makes no difference what Christian Bible you have. If you have a Christian Bible that has footnotes, you can be sure that it will tell you that Luke chapter 4 is quoted in Isaiah chapter 61. And it is, but it's a misquote. And how did Luke go add in the recovery of sight to the blind? The answer is that Luke simply interpolated Isaiah's text in order to make it sound like the kind of thing that was said about Jesus. And again, the book of Luke is already written 85, which means the book of Luke is written a half a century after Jesus was crucified, according to Christian tradition. So by that time, these were the stories that were going around. We know that. We can see that in the book of Mark, a much earlier text. As it turns out, the text that's being quoted, Isaiah is speaking in the first person about himself. He's not speaking in the third person about a future Messiah. So the question is, how does the author of Luke change the word of God? And if Luke is going to tamper with the word of Tanakh, in certain words, he's going to heal the blind. Why would you want to put your trust in a text that alters the word of Hashem? So thank you for asking.
Adon olam asher malach b'terem kol yetzir nivra let nasa בחפצו כל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה